You think I don't see what you are. You come in here with your nice manners and your big ideas, but you are still just a boy from nowhere, and you will never be enough for my daughter. Not in this house. Not in this family. Not ever. Dale Coburn said it slowly, each word placed like a stone, and the dining room of the Coburn family's Muskoka estate went so quiet that the only sound was the lake outside shifting against the dock in the dark. Theo Adeyemi did not move. He was 22 years old and had driven 4 hours from Toronto that weekend in a car with a cracked windshield, wearing the only blazer he owned, and he had sat across from Dale Coburn for 90 minutes eating food. He could not identify and answering questions that were never really questions. He had done all of it the way his mother had taught him to do difficult things, quietly and completely, until there was nothing left to do but be still. Dale was still looking at him. Not with anger, exactly. With the kind of certainty that does not need anger because it has never once been challenged. Theo looked at Camille. Camille was looking at the table. He stood up. He thanked Dale for dinner. He thanked Cecile Ashe, Camille's aunt, who had made herself busy all evening, pretending the conversation at the other end of the table was not happening. He pushed his chair in. He walked out through the front door and down the gravel drive to his car, and he sat in it for a long time without starting the engine. Then he drove home to Toronto, and he did not look back at the lights of the house on the water, and he told himself the thing he had said before about not looking back, which was that there was nothing behind him worth looking at, and this time he did not entirely believe it. That was 4 years ago. He came back on a Wednesday in October, arriving at the Coburn Group's downtown Toronto office building in the passenger seat of a leased sedan with tinted windows, and a driver who had been told to let him off at the corner, not the front. The building was 42 floors of glass and steel on Bay Street, the kind of structure that announces its own importance before you can read the name on it. Theo had read about it in the financial pages for the better part of 2 years. He had read about it the way a man reads about something he intends to understand completely before he touches it. He was wearing a jacket that had been made for him. Not the kind of jacket that announces itself. The kind that simply fits so well that people in rooms like this one know, without knowing how they know, that whoever is wearing it belongs. His name at the security desk was listed under a company called Northgate Advisory Partners. Nobody at the Coburn Group's front desk had reason to know that Northgate Advisory Partners was, in all the ways that mattered, him. The Coburn Group owned 11 hotel properties across Ontario and Quebec, 3 commercial buildings in Calgary and Vancouver, and a resort development on Georgian Bay that had been under construction for 19 months and had recently begun hemorrhaging money in a way that the company's quarterly reports described as a temporary variance, and that Theo, having read every available filing and acquired several that knew was not temporary at all. He had not come to admire the architecture. He had taken a position as a financial consultant on a 3-month contract through a staffing firm that Northgate used for exactly this kind of arrangement. His credentials were real because he had spent 4 years making sure his credentials were real. The financial modeling firm he had started at 23 had grown into something else by 25, not through luck but through the specific, grinding, unglamorous work of being the person in the room who understood the numbers better than anyone else in the room and who charged accordingly. The patent licensing arrangement he had structured for a logistics software client had, in the second year, made more money than the first 3 years of his business combined. He had reinvested it. He had reinvested it again. He had done this with the focused patience of someone who has decided that the goal is not comfort but consequence. By the time he walked into the Coburn Group building that October, Theo Adeyemi was worth more money than Dale Coburn had been willing to believe a boy from nowhere could ever accumulate. He had told no one this. That was the point. He saw Camille Coburn on his 3rd day. She came through the finance department with a set of construction drawings tucked under one arm and a look on her face that Theo recognized before he had time to prepare for recognizing it. It was the look she had always worn when she was moving through a space where she did not entirely trust the ground beneath her feet. Sharp, careful, controlled. She wore her authority the way people wear authority when they have been given it partly as a gift and partly as a test, and are not yet certain which it is. She saw him a half-second later. He watched the drawing shift in her grip. The 4 years closed up like a seam. Theo M's Coburn. He said it the way a consultant says a client's name, professionally with just enough distance that it could not be misread. She came across the open-plan floor anyway, which told him she had changed in ways the careful expression had not. "What are you doing here?" "Contract work. Northgate." "You're the advisory firm my father brought in?" "For the Georgian Bay analysis, yes." She looked at him the way people look at something they are not sure they are seeing correctly. The blazer, the lanyard, the laptop bag. She was doing the arithmetic, and he watched her fail to arrive at any answer that fit. Because the version of Theo she had last seen had been 22 years old with a cracked windshield and a borrowed blazer. And this version did not map onto that one. "You could have told me you were coming." "It didn't seem like my place, Theo." "It's a professional engagement, Camille. Your father hired the firm." She looked at his hands. He let her. 4 years of a particular kind of life had changed his hands, not with calluses, but with the opposite of calluses. The worn, smooth steadiness of someone who has learned that the most dangerous thing you can hold is a number other people haven't read yet. "I heard you left Toronto," she said. "I did, for a while. And now you're back consulting for my family. Someone has to." Her jaw moved. For a moment he thought she would say the thing they were both standing on, that October night in Muskoka, the dining room, what her father had said, what she had not done. But a man in a suit appeared at the end of the room and called her name, and the moment folded shut. "Camille, they're waiting." That was Brandon Fife. Theo had read enough about Brandon Fife to know that he was Dale Coburn's preferred nephew, a man whose primary qualification was being related to Dale, and whose secondary qualification was being willing to confirm everything Dale already believed. He had been given operational oversight of the Georgian Bay development, because Dale trusted family over competence, and the Georgian Bay development had responded to this trust by becoming, over 19 months, a masterclass in what happens when you give a man authority he has not earned. Camille looked at Theo once before she followed Brandon out of the room, and there was a question in it she did not yet have the footing to ask. Theo turned back to his laptop. The day went on as if nothing in it had just changed, which was the version of it he needed to believe for a while longer. That night, he sat in the corporate apartment Northgate, kept on King Street, and made a call on a phone that was not the work one. The voice on the other end belonged to Priya Johal, who had been his lawyer since the year he'd made his first real money, and who had been with him through every iteration of what that money had become. She was precise and fast, and she had, over 4 years, developed a very clear-eyed view of the particular shape of what Theo was doing with the Coburn Group, and she had represented it to the world under a structure of entities clean enough that no reporter who had tried to trace it had managed to get further than the 3rd layer. "How's the access?" she said. "Better than expected. The internal project files are a mess. There's more here than the filings showed, Brandon." "It's worse than Brandon." He paused. "Get me everything on the capital calls for the Georgian Bay Partnership. The actual disbursement records, not the summary." Priya said she would. She always did. He sat for a while after the call in the quiet of the apartment, which was spare in the way that apartments are spare when the person living in them has decided, deliberately, that they do not want the space to say anything about who they are. He had furnished it with nothing that pointed back to him. This was a habit now, not a strategy. He had been careful for so long that carefulness had become the texture of his life, and he was only beginning to notice that the texture was cold. He had not planned to notice that. He had planned to come here, do the work, let the structure he had built, over 4 years, speak for itself at the right moment, and leave Dale Coburn standing in the ruin of his own decisions, without Theo's fingerprints anywhere on the wreckage. He had not planned for Camille. The Georgian Bay project records told a story that took him 8 days to fully read, and that was, once he had read it, impossible to argue with. Brandon Fife had been approving change orders on the resort construction since month 4. Not all of them. Enough of them. The pattern was the same each time. A vendor who existed, a contract that had been legitimate, and then a secondary payment to a numbered company that did not correspond to any additional work Theo could find in the inspection records or the site logs. The amounts were never large enough in any single transaction to draw immediate attention. In aggregate, over 19 months, they were very large. It was not sophisticated. It was patient, and it had been patient enough because the only person above Brandon in the Georgian Bay structure was Dale Coburn, and Dale Coburn reviewed summaries, not ledgers. Theo sat with this for 3 days. He had not come looking for it. He had come with a different plan, a longer, quieter plan that did not require him to find anything in particular, only to be present when the structure he had already built outside this building made itself known. He had spent 4 years acquiring distressed positions in the Coburn Group's debt portfolio, instrument by instrument, patient and invisible, until the debt that the company owed to various creditors was no longer owed to various creditors but was owed, in most of the ways that counted, to entities that Priya managed on his behalf. He had never needed to find anything inside the building. He had only needed to wait. The problem was Camille, because Brandon Fife was the project manager in name, but Camille was the project manager in paperwork. Her name was on the operating agreements. Her signature was on the quarterly submissions to the partnership. She had signed them, he was almost certain, the way a person signs documents they have been given by someone they trust and told are routine. But she had signed them. When the Georgian Bay project collapsed under its own concealed weight, which it would, the collapse would land on whoever had their signature on the filings. Dale Coburn would find a way to be protected. Brandon Fife was already protected, in the way that incompetent men with powerful relatives are always protected. Camille was not. Theo understood that he could let this happen. He understood it clearly because he had spent 4 years learning to understand things clearly. And the understanding sat in his chest that third evening like something he had swallowed wrong. He could let it happen. He had every reason to let it happen. It required nothing of him. He went back to his laptop and wrote the analysis instead. He did it the way he did everything, precisely and completely. He laid out the discrepancy between the approved contracts and the secondary disbursements, the names of the numbered companies, the dates, the amounts, the site records that documented the absence of corresponding work. He cross-referenced it against the partnership filings that bore Camille's signature and made clear, in a way that could not be argued with, that the pattern of approvals preceded her involvement, and that her signature had been placed on documents where the underlying anomaly was buried. 3 layers deep in vendor subschedules that no project manager without forensic accounting training would have had reason to examine. It took him one evening. Numbers had always come to him like a language he had been born already knowing, and he had spent 4 years making that language fluent in the particular dialect of structures designed to hide themselves. He printed it. He left it on Camille's desk in the project office on the 14th floor after the building had emptied, unsigned except for a single line across the top page in his handwriting. Start with the capital call records for month 7 onward. He did not disguise his handwriting. He told himself this was carelessness. He knew it was not. He had spent 4 years leaving no trace of himself anywhere it was not necessary, and a man who could construct an invisible financial position across a dozen entities did not forget to mask a sentence by accident. He wanted her to know it was him. He chose not to examine why, because examining it would have required him to admit something he was not yet ready to admit about which version of this plan had always mattered most. She found it in the morning. He was in the open plan area 2 floors up when he saw her through the glass partition, saw her pick up the document, saw her go still. She read the first page, the way people read something that changes the temperature of a room. Then she looked up, and he stepped back from the glass before her eyes could find him. She did not come find him. That was the first thing that told him she was not the same person she had been at 22. For the next 5 days, she said nothing. She came in early and left late. He watched her pull vendor files, watched her request copies of the subschedules from the development administrator, watched her sit at her desk at 7 in the morning with the numbered company registrations open on her laptop and a pencil moving across a legal pad. She was not taking his word for anything. She was building it herself, piece by piece, so that when she moved, she would be standing on something she had constructed and not on something he had handed her. He had given her a thread. She was building a rope. On the 6th day, she called a meeting with the Georgian Bay Partnership's senior staff. Theo was not in it. He positioned himself in the corridor near the boardroom, which had poor soundproofing because the building was 42 floors of glass, and the glass did not insulate the way the architects had probably promised. He heard her tell the room that she was suspending all vendor payments on the project, voiding the current approval process, and initiating an independent audit of the capital disbursements from month 7 forward. He heard Brandon Fife's voice climb. "You do not have the authority to unilaterally. I have operating authority on this project," Camille said. And her voice did not rise, which means the payments go through me, the audits go through me, and this decision goes through me. If the disbursements are clean, an audit will confirm that and we'll proceed. If they're not, then this family needs to know before anyone else does. Silence. "Your father approved those disbursements. Then my father will want to understand what some of them were for." Theo stood in the corridor with a file folder under his arm and understood that she had just done something she could not undo. She had not gone to Dale first. She had not protected the family's face before she protected the numbers. She had made a decision that would, before the day was over, reach Dale Coburn's desk as a problem she had created rather than a problem she had found. He told himself he should feel the satisfaction of a structure advancing exactly as designed. The Georgian Bay project cracking open from the inside was precisely what he had built 4 years of patience for. Instead, he felt something else, a tightening in his chest that was not satisfaction and was not strategy, and he recognized it before he could stop himself and recognized it as something he had told himself. For 4 years he had finished feeling. She came out of the boardroom a few minutes later and walked across the floor directly toward him, not checking whether anyone was watching. "I know it was you," she said quietly. She stopped in front of him. "I've known your handwriting since I was 19. He said nothing. "I don't know what you're doing here," she said. "I don't know what the full version of this is. But I know that document didn't come from nowhere, and I know you didn't take this contract by accident." She looked at him steadily, with the kind of steadiness that comes from having already made a decision. "Whatever you're planning, I need you to know that I found this on my own. The audit is mine. Brandon's the one who created this problem, not you." "I know," he said. "I'm not finished," she said. "I also need you to know that I owe you something I never gave you. An apology for that night, for sitting there and saying nothing." Her voice didn't waver. "I was 22 and I was afraid of him, and those are reasons and not excuses, and I have had 4 years to know the difference. I'm sorry, Theo." He had rehearsed 100 responses to 100 versions of this conversation across 4 years of drives and flights and early mornings in Toronto. None of the responses were the thing that came out of his mouth, which was, "I know." It was not enough, and it was the truest thing he had said in this building. "Tell me what you're doing here," she said. "The real version." He looked at her for a long moment. "Not yet," he said. "Not here." She held his gaze. Then she nodded once and went back into the building, and Theo stood in the corridor for a moment longer before he went back to work. Dale Coburn heard about the suspended payments before noon. He heard about the audit request before 3. By the time the Georgian Bay Partnership's legal counsel had called him twice, and Brandon Fife had driven to his Rosedale house in person, Dale had decided that the problem was not the audit. The problem was the same problem it had always been: outside interference. Someone had gotten into his daughter's ear, and he did not need to know exactly who to know which direction to look. He made calls. He had people who answered his calls because their fathers had answered his father's calls. And what came back about the advisory consultant named Theo Adeyemi was, on the surface, Almost nothing. An independent financial firm, incorporated 3 years ago, clean references, legitimate client list. No debts, no record, nothing that explained why a man like that would take a 3-month contract engagement for a firm his size. No story. Dale had spent 40 years in commercial real estate learning one thing clearly. A man with no story was the kind of man who had paid to have the story removed. And men who pay to have stories removed do not take contract work in your finance department by accident. He had Brandon pull the partnership filings and search for any overlap between the Northgate client list and Coburn Group creditors. It took 3 days. What came back was not an overlap. It was something quieter and more dangerous. A pattern of debt positions in the Coburn Group's Georgian Bay partnership that had been consolidating slowly, over several years, across a set of entities that all led, eventually, to the same registered address in Ontario that Northgate's filings listed as their principal contact. Dale sat in his Rosedale study and looked at the pattern for a long time. He arrived at the conclusion that a man in his position with his instincts would arrive at. Someone had sent an operative into his company to soften the Georgian Bay position before a larger acquisition move. The Northgate firm was a scout, a preparation. The consultant was a tool. It did not occur to him that the consultant himself was the position, that the man he had sent away from his dinner table 4 years ago had come back owning a significant piece of the debt that was the ground his company stood on, because the architecture of Dale Coburn's entire worldview did not have a space for that answer. Men like Theo Adeyemi got sent. They did not arrive on their own. The certainty made Dale reckless in the way certainty always makes frightened men reckless. He came to the Bay Street office the next morning, which he rarely did. He brought complaints. The advisory engagement had exceeded its scope. The audit request had been unauthorized. The Georgian Bay site reports were behind schedule. He directed these at Theo through the project coordinator, never in person, because Dale Coburn expressed contempt through process rather than confrontation. And the process was designed to make Theo's position uncomfortable enough that he would either step back or leave. Theo did neither. He submitted the requested documentation on schedule. He provided the additional scope analysis Dale had cited, and he provided it better than it had been asked for, which was the only kind of work he knew how to do. He did not complain, and he did not escalate, and every morning he was at his desk before the team arrived. His steadiness unsettled Dale in the way real steadiness unsettles people whose power depends on producing visible reactions in others. What Dale could not see, because Camille had never told him and Theo had never shown him, was that the two of them were meeting twice a week in a coffee shop on Front Street that neither of them chose by accident. It had started the Thursday after the audit meeting. She had texted him a coffee shop name and a time with nothing else, and he had gone because he was no longer pretending, even to himself, that he was only here for the plan. "You said not yet," she said when he sat down. "I'm saying yet," he told her. He did not tell her everything at once, because the everything was large and needed to be told in the right order. But he told her the shape of it, the debt positions, the structure, the 4 years, the reason he had come back at all. She listened the way she had listened when she was 22, completely and without interrupting. And he had forgotten, across 4 years of telling himself he had forgotten her, that she listened like that. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You came back to break him," she said. "Yes. And you found Brandon's fraud by accident." "Yes. And you left the analysis on my desk because you didn't want me to go down with him." He did not answer immediately, which was its own answer. "You still could have," she said. "Let me take the fall. It would have served your purposes." "I know. Why didn't you?" He looked at his coffee. "Because I could stand to let your father lose what he built. I couldn't stand to let you lose what you built. Those are different things." She looked at him across the small table in the way that people look at something they are trying to decide whether to trust. "You should have told me," she said. "When you took the contract, you should have said, this is what I'm doing and this is why. I know I would have helped you." "I know that too," he said. "That's part of why I didn't." She frowned. "If you'd known," he said, You couldn't have done what you did in that boardroom. You couldn't have built that audit on your own evidence and stood on it the way you stood on it. You needed to do that without me behind it, because you needed to know you could. I needed you to know you could." She was quiet again. "That's a very clean reason," she said finally. "It's also true. It can be both." He said nothing. "I'm not the same person I was at that dinner table," she said. "I haven't been for a long time. I don't need you to protect me from information. I know that now. Do you? I'm telling you everything now," he said. "This is me knowing it." She looked at him for a while longer. Then she picked up her coffee. "Okay," she said. "Then tell me the rest." Dale Coburn moved first, which was the move Theo had always known was possible and had built the structure to withstand. He got the call from Priya on a Tuesday at 6:15 in the morning. Dale had convened an emergency session of the Coburn Group's board of directors for 9 o'clock that morning. He had spent the previous 2 days calling in 40 years of favors across the Toronto business community. He had assembled, Priya believed, enough proxy votes to do 2 things in sequence. Remove Camille from her operating role in the Georgian Bay Partnership on grounds of unauthorized scope expansion, and then move immediately to sell the partnership's controlling interest to a pre-identified buyer at a below-market price, before whatever entity was accumulating the debt could convert its position into something actionable. He would burn the asset down himself rather than let someone else name the price. "He has the votes," Priya said. "Not comfortably, but he has them. What time is the meeting?" 9. "If you're not in that room with documentation before the vote closes, the sale goes through and 4 years of positioning is worth nothing." Theo sat in the dark of the King Street apartment and understood the arithmetic completely. He had spent 4 years building invisibility. It was the whole architecture of what he had done. No name attached, no face to the fund, no traceable line between the consultant on the 14th floor and the entity that held the debt. He had imagined the reveal happening on his terms, at a moment of his choosing, in a way that could not be misread. To stop what Dale was doing, he would have to walk into a boardroom before 9 o'clock in the morning and attach his face to every invisible thing he had built, in a room full of people who had spent their careers deciding who was allowed to own what in this city. And Camille would be in that room. Camille, who had sat with him twice a week for a month on Front Street while he told her the shape of what he had done without telling her the size of it, would watch him walk in and produce 4 years of documented acquisition and understand, in the time it takes to do arithmetic, that the shape and the size were not the same thing, and that he had let her know the shape while keeping the size behind his back. He had been waiting for a better moment to tell her the full number. There was no better moment. There was only 9 o'clock. "Tell the board I'm coming," he said. The Coburn Group's board met in a conference room on the 32nd floor, and at 9 o'clock Dale Coburn took the chair at the head of the table the way a man takes a chair he has never once had reason to doubt. Brandon Fife sat to his right, pale and present. Camille sat midway down the table with a folder in front of her and no visible allies, which Theo knew, watching the room from just outside the glass, was not the same thing as no allies. He had watched her for a month. He knew what she had in that folder. Dale did not waste the morning on preamble. He called the session to order and read a resolution removing Camille Coburn from her operating authority in the Georgian Bay Partnership, citing unauthorized scope expansion and the disruption of approved procurement processes. He framed it in governance language, flat and procedural, the kind of language designed to make a knife sound like a policy. When he finished, he looked at Camille with an expression that was almost patience. "This isn't a punishment," Dale said. "It's a correction. The partnership has a timeline and a budget, and what you started last week put both of them at risk." 3 years ago, she might have accepted that framing. 2 months ago, she might have. She opened the folder. "Before the board votes," Camille said. "They should have the information they're voting on." Dale's expression shifted. The matter on the table is the Georgian Bay Partnership," Camille said, and her voice carried down the table without effort. "So let's look at it." She distributed copies, one to each board member, unhurried. These are the capital disbursement records for the Georgian Bay development from month 1 through month 19. These are the vendor contracts those disbursements correspond to. And these are the site inspection records and permit filings for the period covered. She let them read for a moment. I'd like someone to explain to me how the partnership paid $230,000 to 3 vendors that have no physical address, no registered employees, and no documented relationship with any construction trade board in the province. Because those payments are in the records your board approved, and the work they were supposed to fund is not in any inspection report I can find. She paused. I suspended the vendor payments because the vendor activity is fraudulent. If that's the mismanagement this board is being asked to discipline, I'd like it in the minutes exactly what I was managing. The room changed temperature. An older board member named Elliot Ash, who had known Dale for 30 years, turned a page slowly and said, in a voice that was not yet an accusation, "Dale, were you aware of this?" "My daughter is deflecting," Dale said. The vendor question can be reviewed separately. The issue before this board, Elliot Ash said, just got complicated. It had not become a victory. Camille knew that. She had not come in with the votes, only with the facts. And facts in a room like this one can only do so much against a man who has spent 40 years accumulating the thing that operates faster than facts in boardrooms. She had bought herself minutes of doubt in a room that had arrived decided. That was when the door opened. Theo walked in, and for a moment no one in the room processed what they were looking at, because the person who came through the door did not match any version of him that the room had assigned a category to. He was not in a contractor's jacket. He wore a suit that had been made for him by someone who made suits for very few people, and he carried himself across the floor with the ease of a man who has stood in 1,000 rooms that looked like this one and who does not need the room to recognize him in order to know where he belongs. Dale recovered first because contempt was Dale Coburn's fastest available response. "This is a closed board session. I don't know how you got to this floor, but you can wait, Mr. Coburn." The voice did not belong to Theo. It belonged to Priya Johal, who had come in behind him in a charcoal suit with a leather folio, which she set on the conference table with the quiet finality of someone who has done this before and knows what happens next. "My name is Priya Johal. I'm legal counsel to the controlling creditor of the Georgian Bay Partnership's outstanding debt obligations. My client asked me to be present before this board takes any votes this morning. I'd recommend the board hear what I have to say." She opened the folio without hurrying. She laid the documents out the way Theo had taught her to lay everything out, so that the structure was visible before anyone in the room could construct an objection to it. The acquisition records, the assignment of debt positions, the conversion filings, the 4-year history of a private entity accumulating the Coburn Group's distressed financial obligations, one position at a time, across instruments that had not been designed to be traced and that had, nonetheless, been traced in this room by the entity that now held them. And then the final document. "As of close of business yesterday," Priya said, "my client holds a convertible debt position in the Georgian Bay Partnership equivalent to 44.1% of the economic interest in the partnership's underlying assets and has exercised its contractual right of conversion. This represents the single largest position at this table. The resolution the board is being asked to vote on this morning would, if passed, require my client's consent. I'm here to advise that consent will not be given." The room was completely quiet. Dale's eyes moved from the lawyer to the man in the suit standing beside her, and Theo watched him do the arithmetic, watched him arrive at the conclusion and reject it, and arrive at it again, and find that there was no other conclusion. "Who?" Dale said. His voice was not what it had been. "Who is your client?" "You've met him," Priya said. 4 years ago." Theo stepped forward. "You looked into me," he said to Dale. "You found a debt position consolidating across the low country and a consultant on your 14th floor, and you decided I was someone's instrument. You couldn't make the other answer fit because the other answer required you to believe that a boy you sent away from your table had come back owning the ground under it." He let that sit in the room. There was no one behind me, Mr. Coburn. I built it. Every position, every instrument, every dollar of it, starting the week after you told me I would never be enough for your daughter." He turned to the table. "I'm calling 2 votes. First, the resolution to remove Camille Coburn from operating authority is withdrawn, and I'm asking the minutes to document why. Because what she did last week was identify a fraud that this board's chair declined to investigate." He looked at Brandon Fife, who had the expression of a man who has just understood that the floor is not there. "Second, I'm voting my position to remove Brandon Fife from his role as financial overseer of the Georgian Bay Partnership, effective immediately, and to refer the disbursement irregularities to an independent auditor with full document access." He did not look at Dale again when he said the last part. He looked at Elliot Ash, who was still holding the page Camille had given him, and at the other board members who had walked into this room with their votes already decided, and who were now discovering that decided and final are not the same thing. Elliot Ash called the vote. The board voted the way the numbers required it to vote. When it was done, Brandon Fife left the room without speaking. The other board members followed in 2s and 3s. Priya gathered her folio, and in the emptying conference room, Dale Coburn sat at the head of the table that was still technically his, holding nothing, while his daughter stood at the other end of it, looking at the man who had just handed her the morning. Theo waited for her eyes to come to him. When they did, he understood immediately what he saw. She was running the numbers. The real numbers, the full size of them, the 4 years of accumulation that he had described to her in shape but never in scale. And he watched her fit the shape she had known against the scale she was only now learning. And he watched the expression change as the arithmetic resolved. She had put her hand on his face in that coffee shop on Front Street. She had told him she wasn't the same person she'd been at 22. She had told him she didn't need to be protected from information. And he had given her the shape without the scale, 'cause the scale frightened him. Not on his own behalf, but on hers. Because there is a size of thing that changes the nature of everything around it. And he had not trusted that what they had built in those Front Street mornings was large enough to hold the full weight of what he had built across 4 years. He had been wrong about whether to tell her. She had been right about what she could hold. "How much?" she said, when the room was empty except for the 2 of them and Dale. "All of it," he said. "The debt position, yes. Those Front Street conversations," she said. "You told me the shape of what you were doing, yes. Not the size. No, why?" He looked at her. "Because I was afraid that if you knew the size of it, you'd wonder if everything else was just part of the architecture. The coffee, the conversations. You reaching out first." He paused. "I didn't trust that I'd been given something real. I have spent 4 years trusting nothing I couldn't verify in a document. That is a failure I own." She was quiet. "You should have trusted me," she said. "I know I told you I wasn't as afraid of the full version." "I know, and you let me walk into this room not knowing." Yes, it sat between them. Then Theo reached into the folio that Priya had left on the table. He took out a single document and set it in front of Camille. "That's a voting proxy," he said. "It assigns the full voting rights attached to my position in the Georgian Bay Partnership to you, in your personal capacity, for as long as you choose to hold them, not the economic position that I keep because I earned it and because the alternative is worse creditors than me at your family's table, but the votes. Every decision this partnership makes, it makes through you, not through me." She looked at the document and did not touch it. "That's the largest lever in this room," she said. "Yes, you're handing it to me." "Yes, why?" He looked at her steadily. "Because I didn't come back here to hold power over this family. I came back because your father told me I was nothing, and I needed to prove to myself that he was wrong, and I have proven it in the most thorough way I knew how. But proof is not the same as a life. I don't want to sit at the top of something I built out of anger." He paused. "I want to hand you the thing I built and see what you build with it. That's the version of this I actually want." Camille looked at the document for a long time. The proof was not in anything he had said. It was in the page in front of her. A man setting down the instrument he had spent 4 years constructing. and placing it in her hands with nothing asked in return. You do not give away the only thing you built your whole architecture around to someone you are still using. She had managed enough of her family's structures to know what control cost and what it meant when someone let it go. She picked up the pen. At the head of the table, Dale Coburn had not moved. He had heard all of it. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at nothing in particular. And the thing that was leaving him was not the power, which was already gone, but the story he had told himself about the power, the one that said he had always been protecting something, that his certainty had been a form of care. He had looked at Theo Adeyemi 4 years ago and seen the thing he most feared, a man with nothing who wanted something that belonged to his family. He had been wrong about the nothing, and he had been wrong about the wanting, and the cost of the error was the document his daughter was signing on the far end of the table. "I was wrong about you," Dale said. It came out flat and rough, the way things come out when they have been held down for a long time and can no longer be held. Theo looked at him. "You were," he said. He did not soften it, because Dale did not need it softened. He needed it said. "But you gave her everything she needed to stand in this room today, even if you didn't mean to. Every time you underestimated her, she worked harder. Every time you told her the family name was the only thing that mattered, she went looking for what mattered on her own. Whatever you got wrong about me, you gave her the stubbornness to not stay wrong about anything." He looked at Camille. "She did that herself," he said. "I only handed her a thread." Camille set the pen down. She looked at her father for a long moment, and what passed between them was not forgiveness, not yet, but the particular silence that happens when two people who have been standing in opposition arrive at the same ground and discover that the ground is large enough for both of them, if they choose to stand on it differently. The Georgian Bay Resort opened the following September. The scaffolding came down on a clear morning, with the bay flat and cold behind it. And the building stood the way things stand when they have been built by people who understood what they were building. Camille ran the partnership. She ran it well, which surprised no one who had watched her in the boardroom, and surprised everyone who had only watched her before it. The decisions were hers, and the consequences were hers, and the board that had assembled to remove her now waited for her assessment before it moved. Brandon Fife's situation was resolved quietly and completely by the independent auditor, and then by the relevant authorities. Dale kept an office at the Bay Street building. Camille had offered it over Theo's raised eyebrow and Dale's stiff silence, because she had decided that the opposite of her father's way of using power was not punishment but space. A place at the edge of something that had won him his, where he could learn, slowly and late, how to be in a room without needing to own it. He was learning. On the evening of the resort's opening, Theo and Camille stood at the edge of the dock while the party went on behind them in the lit windows of the building. The bay was dark and still, and the air smelled the way Georgian Bay smells in September, like cold water and pine and the particular clarity that comes after a long summer ends. "You could have held on to it," Camille said. "All of it. Most people would have." "I know," Theo said. "You built it for 4 years. I know, and you handed it over in about 2 minutes." He looked at the water. "I spent 4 years thinking I came back to take something from your father. Turned out that was never going to be enough. Taking something from him just means he was right that it was worth protecting." He paused. "I didn't want to take anything. I wanted to build something and put it in front of you and see what you did with it." He turned to look at her. "Turns out that's what I came back for. I just had to go all the way around before I understood which one it was." She took his hand, and there was nothing in the gesture that needed explaining. They stood on the dock in the September dark. Two people who had been told in one way or another that they did not belong in each other's world, and who had spent 4 years in a boardroom and a series of Tuesday mornings on Front Street, arriving at the only answer that ever mattered, which was that the world in question was small and temporary, and that they had between them already built something larger. And that was enough. More than enough. The kind of enough that does not require anyone's permission to keep. If you have ever sat at someone else's table and been told what you were worth, I'd like you to hear this. The person doing the telling is always looking at the wrong thing. Dale Coburn looked at a 22-year-old with a cracked windshield and saw a ceiling. He missed the floor entirely. He missed what was being built, quietly and patiently, in the space he had so confidently dismissed. That is the thing about people who measure others by what they currently have. They are always looking at the wrong number. If this story reminded you of something you've lived through, or someone you've watched prove the wrong person right, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Those stories are where the best of these begin.